Back at the garage on a miserable wet day outside, so much for spring. Time to try and work out how to connect the motor to the motor mounts. Now actually, having taken the battery box and stuff out, it's easy to see that this motor isn't quite straight. If you look down from the top at the cross brace, motor mount, whatever you want to call it here, you can tell this is canted off to one side, so we need to straighten that up. But what we can also see, and this is something pointed out by Roy on the comments, thank you very much Roy, are these three mounting holes here. Now annoyingly, these are M12 by 1.25, not M12 by 1.5, which is what I have, but nonetheless we have three useful mounting points at the back of the motor rather than having to get back to the adapter plate up there, which means that actually rather than having to worry about coming down around the steering column, we can just go up up and over it, create some sort of U shape maybe, or some sort of plate that goes between the two that we can then tie in to those three mounting holes. I've brought all my spare steel stock with me. I don't really want to buy anything else exclusively for this, so I'll use what I've got. And then I just need to sort of size some bits of steel, make up some plates to sit on here first of all probably, make up some plates or something to bolt into those three areas, get that mounting pattern right, I'll get it right this time, and get it centered properly, and then tack it all together. Won't get all that done today, but we can make a start. First things first though, you'll notice still have fuel lines in here, and if I'm going to be firing a welder or a grinder around here, we need to get rid of those first. Forgive the noise, the condensers are back on. A few things. The fuel lines are gone, as you can tell from the cat litter down there. There was a bit of spillage. Thought I had it clamped up not quite well enough. There's actually a surprisingly small amount of fuel that spreads a long way. I've shifted the jack round so that it's at 90 degrees to the car, so I can use it to shuffle everything back and forth, and done that a few times till I'm pretty happy that that's square and central. And if you look down from the top here, I don't think we're going to get that motor much squarer than that to the cross member. Need to leave that fuel to evaporate for a bit longer before I start making any heat or sparks around here, but we can start to make up some plates, maybe start to make up some cardboard to see how this might work. Bit of dirty finger technique, and this channel is becoming one with all the innuendo. And I've got a rough template. I think it matches it pretty well, and you can see that that will fit onto this piece. Thus I cut off the backing plate, or the adapter plate. So we've now got that potentially on one side, and our two plates on the motor mounts. Question is, how do we join them up? Because the battery box comes pretty close to the motor, and with the obvious challenge of it fouling the steering rack and particularly depending on how far back it goes, the steering rack or the hydraulic connections on the steering rack. We don't want the new motor mount to cause us problems there. At the same time, we don't want to obstruct the low voltage electrical connections. It's really nice that those are accessible. So I want something quite flat, really, that comes across the back here, goes off our plate and ties in to our two mounts. By the way, I've jacked the motor up to the point where I think the gearbox is pretty much horizontal, which means that should be where it lives now. This is where it sits. I think excited is probably the wrong word, but I'm quite enthused by the possibility of being able to trim this adapter plate down even further, because of the space that gives us on each side for mounting other stuff nice and low. Obviously you've got to be careful of interference with the suspension arms, but if we can put things, and you still want them to be accessible. The lid, for example, of the power steering reservoir, which is on top of the power steering pump, still needs to be accessible, because there'd be no point in doing this engine bay redesign if it was hard to get to. But we are reclaiming space, so thanks again, Roy. This was a very smart plan of yours. Transferred my paper tracing onto a cardboard template, and you can see, even though those aren't exactly the right size bolts, they screw in a couple of threads before they get stuck. That template is a really good fit. So transfer that to metal and then look at how we connect that to the two bars. If you look from the top down, do we come in this way or this way to the plate? So come off this and come that way, but that, if we use bar or box section, that gets us into potentially fouling our motor back here. Or do we come in that way? But that's obviously not an option from this side. So do we do this going to here and then that mount going to there as originally planned? I quite like the simplicity of just a bar between those two tied into here, and 3 12mm plus all of the bolts into there should be more than enough strength. Kind of full mock-up, or as close as I can get at the moment. That's the Outlander charger that will be sitting there. As you can see, no problem with height of that. Loads of space to spare, even though I think we probably will have to pull this up a bit. There's not a lot of clearance. Let me see if I can give you an angle where you can actually see. Not a lot of clearance on the hydraulics there, and you need a bit for the connectors. But over the top here, you can see that a 40 by 40 box probably won't be an issue. Yeah, maybe a pair of 20 by 20s might be better actually. And then I just have to work out how to tie it in down there. Maybe those aren't the right plates, and actually you want some plates that have got a bit more length coming back this way, so that our 20 by 20s can just tie straight into them. Running out of time for today, but you can see that I've just drilled some holes out of that plate which fit perfectly. And I'm starting to think, actually, do I need to use the original BMW mounts at all? Or do I actually just come down off this plate to this cross member? Not a hard mount. I want to avoid any NVH, noise, vibration and harshness. But if I do that, I'll have to mount it in 2 places to resist any sort of torsional load. So I'm thinking is cut this down, make a nice little neat triangle, have a plate, or some sort of neat shape anyway, have a plate that goes horizontally across the bottom. That will sit under the battery box so we've got no issues with fouling. And mount that plate in 2 places, probably in the middle of these 2. I'll just weld a little plate on with a captive nut or a threaded bit of steel here. 2 plates where some little rubber mounts can go in and just tie in there somehow so that it resists torsion and sits down quite nicely. And yet again, we free up space around the engine bay and leave things looking nice and clean. Worst case scenario, if we did need a bit more torque resistance, I could always put a torque arm out one side and tie that in on one of the old engine mounts. Wouldn't look like this obviously because you need to be able to get to the thread on the top of the mount, but just to give you an idea. So running out of time, as I say, need to get moving, but I think next step will be to cut this down, to clean this up and weld something on there, to find some alternative engine mounts, maybe even reuse use a suspension bushing. We shall see. A variety of ways we could go about this, but I think that'll be much, much neater. Squeezed in an extra trip to the workshop, brought some new tools. What are they called? Rivnut. Rivnut tool. You can make these, but it was, given how many I got with the tool and a bunch of adapters for different sizes, it made sense to just buy it all. So Rivnut tool, that's going to be used for putting the battery box together. That's what's going to hold the lid to the frame. Can't remember if I've showed these already. New wire strippers. Stop me destroying my teeth. The adhesive has arrived from Tribute Automotive to bond some of the body parts together, notably the headlamp cups into the front of the body. Got some rear bushes for the subframe and rear suspension, rear swing arms, trailing arms, which need doing. They're a bit clunky, and these were the only MOT advisory when the 300 finally passed. So what I'll probably do is pull the subframe out of the GT, since I'm going to need to change the diff on that anyway. Pull the subframe out of the GT, clean all that up, paint it, probably not powder coated at this stage, rebush it, and then put the new one, have it ready to go so it can drop straight onto the 300. When I get that in, let's change the body over. What else have we got in here? Some bolts, 3 short M12 by 1.25 bolts to attach the motor to that plate that I made up the other day. Onto the next box, some Land Rover engine mounts. I don't know if these are going to work, but they were cheap. Let's get that open. Looked like a good option to mount our electric motor to that cross member in the new fashion I talked about before. And finally, clue to something I'm going to be building soon. I've got a bunch of steel coming, if that's more of a clue, on the 20th, and I'm going to be building something for the workshop, which will go on these massive heavy duty casters so it can be moved around. Guesses in the comments, please. So a bit of credit card engineering. That said, it's also been my birthday, so big thanks to those contributors to some of those tools. Oh, I forgot one actually. I've added to my Makita collection a LXT orbital sander, random orbital sander, for helping with bodywork and cleaning up bits of metal and things. Nice little addition to my ambition to own the entire Makita electric range, or at least 18 volt range. So that's the new tools. Our new bolts fit nicely, although they're fractionally too long, so I have to turn those down in the lathe. I didn't have my calipers here the other day, so I couldn't measure very easily what the depth was, and actually couldn't find many shorter than those ones, which are I think about 25 millimeters long. So I'll take a few mil off that, which is fine. These are our new engine mounts. You can see actually they're not much smaller than the BMW ones, although those are quite old and a little bit tired. So nice to have some nice new ones for the sake of £8 or whatever it was for a pair. Thinking they probably sit something a bit like that, maybe fractionally higher up to give space for a captive nut underneath. And then you can go into a plate on there, that's one mount, and then we'll come across from the plate over to here and do the same thing again. So have it sitting sort of like that. And then we've got a nice, neat solution for the engine mounts. Now, what that does is take away these holes, which actually last time I used for mounting the battery box, but what it releases is the old engine mounts. So actually, we could use the old engine mounts for the rear mounting of the battery box. But that leaves the question of what to do with the front ones, or front mounts, because there's not a lot of options on there really. Need something up here really, and there's only the radiator mount, which isn't really a strong point. I don't really want to weld anything to here if I can avoid it, and obviously don't want to be welding to this car, since this car's not going to have the battery box in the same layout. It's going to be tucked further back, fitting around the steering column if it can, because obviously in the GT, with a bit of luck, the motor finishes there and we've got all this space, even more space, where we can tuck batteries further back behind the axle if we can. Bit more thinking, sorry this is all cardboard and talking and mock-ups today, but I originally thought about putting some 6mm plates in here to weld to, maybe ones that could bolt on and start from there. And then I thought, actually, don't need that. Why don't we just go straight to some angle that I can shape to go down here so I can get a strong weld. Cut a wedge out some box sections, some of the 40x40 box section. Nice and strong, probably a bit taller than that, and a bit more of an angle, so there's plenty of space for the unmodified screw thread from the Land Rover mounts to go. But that means these will go nice and low, so it shouldn't interfere with the battery box. We can shuffle them as far back as possible. And yeah, so I figure might just cut some steel out and just start to cut it down. Maybe make another template first, because that's not really a template, that's literally just some cut up cardboard. But make one for each side and try and cut those out of some 40x40 box and just see if they drop in, if we can get a nut on the back, and if the engine mounts will fit. Two options. Simple option, just a straight sort of hoop with a captive nut weld underneath that will sit like that, so I can have a horizontal bar welded straight to here that will sit on with some clearance for this nut. Easy to manufacture, but you'll notice that these engine mounts are angled to give a bit more torsional resistance. So I could angle these, which I think it looks kind of cool, but means I'd have to bend the bar that goes across here, whether that's a piece of folded sheet, which is one option, or just another piece of 6mm, which is heavy but nice and strong, especially with a bit of bracing if it needs it. Bit torn. I like this approach. I don't really want to do more fabrication than I need to. And this also sits higher, so it's more likely to foul the battery box. Whereas this one can sit about 1 centimetre lower because it doesn't need to have the angle on it. And you can see it's pretty much in line with the top of the steering rack, which we need to clear anyway. So apart from the extra height, obviously, where the nut will go, this bit sits nice and low, and so it allows us to keep the battery box as low as possible. For which reason, I think I'm probably going to go down the route of simplicity. These are very rough at the moment, but we have our 2 little extensions for the cross member there. The only thing I've had to do to the sort of arch shape is narrow it at the front slightly so that it sits flush. Obviously, as you can see, these things narrow towards the front and they just become very fractionally less than the 40mm of this box section. So I just use the vise to narrow them both by 1mm or 2. So that they sit flush now. So I need to clean those up, need to clean up the steel underneath, need to weld some captive nuts on, some 10mm captive nuts. Just checking the thread on those engine mounts is a normal M10 by 1.5, I think it will be. And by the way, my bolts here do not need shortening, they just needed a spanner to put them in because it's a bit tight. So let's get all that cleaned up and welded on. Then we can get the engine mounts in and work out where the bar's going to go, the crossbar, and what shape it needs to be as well to clear access to this nut, because obviously if it's going to be welded to here, you need to be able to get a spanner on that to some description. Ideally a socket. If not a socket, then enough clearance to get a ratchet ring spanner ideally. Yeah, we shall see. These are all cleaned up and at least tacked in. So the next step is working out what to do for what sits on top of them. Let's get the rubber mounts in and measure up a little bit. Now that everything's cooled down a bit, got the rubber mounts in, and I've jacked the motor up very slightly. It's still straight, possibly even straighter than it was before, but if I can find the piece of steel, let's get a piece of steel. Gives us a big advantage because a flat 6mm, which is, I know, potentially hugely over-engineered. We can take some weight out of this afterwards. But that now fits, and I've checked, leaves room for a socket to go on the bolt there, albeit with a long extension. So now the only problem is that this piece of plate I've got left is a bit narrow. I'd really like it to cover the whole of the thing, just for neatness sake. Whereas in fact, if I put that up to there, it's only going to come up to there. A couple of things I could do if I want to be really fussy and tidy about this. I could add some steel on to round that out once it's over here. It's basically an 8 centimetre circle. So I could weld that on there and do my hole, and then just weld a little extension on there and tidy it up. But really, we're not losing a lot strength-wise for that. So I might come back to that. I might just cut this down. It needs to be 30 centimetres. Unfortunately, the larger piece of steel I've got off the end of here isn't quite big enough. You can see that with the motor at this height, because this is at an angle, I might have to weld a funny little fillet to tidy it up around the back, but that's all right. So I shall cut this piece of steel down, mark out and drill some holes, and then we can get this two pieces cleaned up and tacked together. Last shot of the day before I have to break. You've got the plate in now, so that will need trimming down. The top one needs trimming down, obviously. Both need cleaning up before they can be welded together. And that, I think, will do for our engine mounts. I probably won't film the last bit of this, I'll just want to get it done quickly. But you've seen most of the process. There'll be a lot of tidying up and shaping and cleaning up and painting, obviously. Need to get some paint on these bits down here as well. But overall, pretty happy with that, with at least how it's starting to come out anyway. I'll wrap up there for today because I need to get home. I'm not going to be able to get back in the workshop for a few days, but not far off getting those engine mounts done now. Next bit will be to start building the frame for the ancillaries and for the inverter. So we'll tackle that in the next video on the Z300 electric car conversion upgrade, really, since it's already electric. I'm going to start trying to do a bit more of a regular schedule. It's hard to do a regular schedule for the DIY EV chat videos because just actually getting guests has proven harder than I thought. Having to go out and sort of individually pursue people to ask them to do it rather than just posting something out there and seeing who will come forward. If you do have an EV conversion on the road and do want to be on a DIY EV chat, then please do drop me a line. Find me on social media at Book of the Future on Instagram or Twitter, or find me on any of the forums where I'm Bobby Come Lately. Bobby_come_lately. Long story as to why, but anyway. So thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Oh yeah, just finishing what I was saying about trying to do a regular schedule. I'm going to try and get out a video a week other than the DIY EV chat. Try and get them out roughly the same time on a Monday evening, which seems to be when most people are watching these. So thanks for watching.